what I think that every single good person does who's a professional or who's good at sight reading, what they do is the moment they look at any piece of sheet music, instantly, the brain needs to see where the beats are or where the pulses are. So any piece of music, like if I look at this sonatina and I look at the first line, I can't look at the first line without immediately seeing what I would describe as an augmented reality grid of vertical lines where all the beats are. Hello and welcome to the Heart of the Piano YouTube channel. I'm Bob Rose. Welcome to the latest in this series of the most common mistakes that non-professional pianists make. This one's huge, and every single video that I've been making, I go, oh, this is definitely the biggest problem. And then the next one, I go, no, this is the biggest problem. And actually, what I'm going to talk about in this video, this really is the biggest problem, but it's not technical like a lot of the other problems were. So basically, this is to do with rhythm. And in my experience, this is actually the thing that most people are weakest at, especially classical pianists. Now, I'm going to be talking not just about classical, but about rock and pop as well, although there is sort of a little bit of an emphasis on classical. Now, this video is, I'm going to be incredibly ambitious and try and squeeze a huge amount into this. So forgive me if there's moments where the structure is a little bit tricky. I'm being wildly ambitious. So basically, for people who just want the bullet points, for people who don't want to hear me waffling on, near the end of the video, at this timestamp, I'm going to go through the bullet points of just the basic points that I've gone through, like the too long didn't read. So go there if you don't want to hear me droning on. But I do recommend it because it's not enough just to know what the points are. You know, I'm going to describe a little bit about them. It's not enough just to go, oh, it's this, that, and that. Right, now I know what I need to do. Anyway, so poor rhythm. Why do people have poor rhythm in general, especially classical pianists? I think the reason for this is there's so much focus on, am I playing the correct notes? Is this correct? Is this correct? And there's, like I've spoken about in my other videos, there's this extreme narrow focus concentrating. And when we're in this narrow focus concentrating on this note here, is this the correct note? Is that the correct note? There's no space left over for rhythm, because rhythm are sort of things, it's a flow in time. And when we're narrow focusing on, is this correct? Is this correct? Let me give you an example. You'll hear a lot of playing like this. That probably won't sound that unfamiliar to you. And the person who's been practicing in this kind of way, I've got all the correct notes. Yeah, I've got the correct note here. That's correct. And I want to get this note. And they probably just won't have practiced. Well, how do I get it? How do I just get it to flow? And there's a feeling that that a lot of people, non-professionals, feel it's better to be absolutely correct. This is correct. This is, and then that's correct. And most of you will feel uncomfortable with that, because rhythm in many ways is the most important thing. And I'm going to try and deliberately play that with some wrong notes. If I go, but let me play it with a good rhythm. So, now, in my opinion, that is still better than going. I'd rather hear the one with wrong notes, but you want to put a little bit of feeling into it. Most people will forgive that wrong note. It might be a bit like, oh, that was a wrong note. But people are going to be way more forgiving of that than they are. People would rather hear the wrong note. So basically, people are prioritizing the wrong things. But there's a whole load more problems that I'm going to go into. So the first thing that I'm going to go into in depth, and this is another sort of really common reason why non-professionals tend not to be all that good with rhythm. Rhythm is a thing that we feel in our bodies. Now, I'm going to try not to go down this rabbit hole too much, because I think that when I'm teaching, a lot of my students kind of question this. They question the importance of the body and of being interoceptive, and I'll talk about that word in a minute, of feeling everything that's going on. It's like, why can't I, isn't it enough just to think about it? And I'll probably address this in other videos, but I was listening a couple of days ago to a podcast as I was thinking about planning this particular podcast, this particular YouTube episode. And I was listening to a podcast episode to do with music psychology. I'll leave a link in the description below. And basically, there was a guy talking about the concept of groove. And he was talking about the concept of groove from the lens of music psychology. So, like, there's a bit more of a sort of rigorous definition to it. Now, in the podcast, he came up with this particular definition of groove, which is the pleasurable state of wanting to move one's body to music. Now, at the time, I thought, I'm not totally 100% sure I agree with that exact definition. And then I went and looked at his work, his academic papers, and yeah, there's much wider definitions than this. But there was something about, in this context, in this podcast episode, the pleasurable state of wanting to move one's body with a musical rhythm, with music. And I thought, yeah, a lot of people describe groove as, and describing rhythm as moving your body in time with music. But it really struck me in that moment of time, that use of the word pleasurable, and that this is the deep meaning of the word groove. So it got me to thinking that what a lot of my students do when they're trying to get good at rhythm, they try and sort of get good at it. Sometimes I get them to sort of think about how their body moves to it, but a lot of the time it's not pleasurable. So, you know, I'm sure you can think of yourself and students and people in general who learn, and the teacher saying you've got to get the right rhythm, and they start going. That's not pleasurable. It's got to be something that feels pleasurable. So, by the way, I've never learnt this piece, and I'm sure I'm massacring it in all kinds of ways, but I'm using it just to illustrate bad and less bad. So, we want to think to ourselves, how can we play the music, not just for me, but for anybody listening? How can I make them want to move to this music in a way that feels pleasurable? So part of that is to not just be like, that's not pleasurable. So, and also, like, let's say that a lot of people won't be learning it quite that badly. But what they might do, they might not be counting, they might not be aware of where the beats are. So they might do something like, which is like, some beats are too long, some beats are too short. People aren't going to do it exactly like that. Let me see if I can come up with other variations of that. And it's not pleasurable because there are pauses. There's bits where it just doesn't flow. If we can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, it's more pleasurable, but not like a metronome. We don't want to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, if you've listened to one of my previous YouTube episodes in this series on tension and release, you'll remember that when there is musical tension, we slow down slightly. And when that tension is released, we speed up slightly. So what we can do, we can look at this. Again, I don't really know why I've chosen this. I've never played it. But anyway, so we can go no tension, bit more tension, the tension is released. Bit more tension, released a bit, but then loads of tension here. And then that tension is released. So what I can do is I get to those bits, I can slow down ever so slightly, but in a way that I feel with my body. It's not just purely conceptual and artificial in my head. It's like a feeling that there's a pleasure. There's a pleasure in the suspense of enjoying that like that. Did you feel that I slowed down slightly? Now, the thing is, when you play an entire piece of music, especially classical in this way, you have to balance it. If I really milk it in this moment, now what do I do for the rest of the piece? I've kind of disturbed all of the balance of everything else. But it works. You can definitely hear that works. If I play it like this, where I elongate that beat. Now, if I do the opposite and just speed up through it, you can feel that that just doesn't do the same thing at all. And if I go to the next bit, that works. But if I do the opposite and speed up, that's just not the same. So this is really important, that with the feeling of rhythm, there's a pleasure that we get in tuning into the rhythm, which people do not get when they're non-professionals and they're focusing super hard on correct note, correct note. So you have to spend some of your practice time, a good chunk of your practice time, listening to the rhythm. Thinking, am I happy? Does that make me want to move my body in a pleasurable way to that rhythm? I also want to throw in that another thing from this podcast episode about rhythm, about groove, is the consistent findings in psychology and music psychology, that when we move our bodies in synchrony, like at exactly the same time, in the same ways, when we move our bodies in the same way and at the same time with other people, we instantly and naturally form a closer bond and trust in this person, even if they're complete strangers. This is the power of music. This is what music does. And so, there's a lot of research that looks at the power of how we move, not only just in time with other people, but moving together in synchrony with music. And it does powerful, powerful things to things like empathy and, like I said, trust and bonding. It's funny, I remember, I think off the top of my head, and I'll have to look for this citation. This is literally just off the top of my head. I remember reading about a study that showed with young infants, when there's a caretaker and they're moving the young infant in time with the music, like that there'll be like a simple song and they're going ba, ba, ba in time with the music, compared with moving them out of time with the music. So they're bouncing them up and down, but out of time with the music. And then later on, they pretend to drop a whole load of stuff onto the floor. Well, the infants or the young kids who've been like bounced up and down in time with the music are way more likely to go, let me help you, and pick those things up. There's something very, very powerful about actually moving our bodies in time with music and in time with other people. So, this is sort of further illustrating just how important the feeling of embodiment and of moving our bodies in time with music is. Now, there's also other interesting findings. I'm not sure this was in the podcast episode, but it is in one of the research papers, and I'll leave a link below, one of the research papers, I think, done by the guy who was doing this podcast episode. And this shows that in brain scans, when we're listening to music with a very, very high level of groove, so groove, there's a very steady beat, and it makes us want to move pleasurably to it. When we're in a brain scanner listening to music with a high level of groove, then the part of the brain that controls the body, like the motor cortex, lights up and does all kinds of stuff. It's very activated by this feeling of groove, even if we're not actually moving our body. So the part of the brain that wants to move is firing away, even if we're not actually moving. And conversely, if we're listening to music that does not have a high level of groove in the brain scanner, the brain doesn't light up those things. So there really is, even if we think that it's not in the body, the part of the brain controlling the body is very much activated by music. So hopefully I'm convincing you that, the body is really super important here. So when we are in this state that I keep coming back to in all the other videos and in all my podcast episodes, and actually I do recommend my podcast. My podcast is also called Heart of the Piano, and that's where for years, I've basically spoken primarily about the psychological aspects of playing and how to be good with the psychological aspects. So YouTube for years has just basically been the mechanics, the technique, the tutorials, like for things like examination boards. But I am going to start bringing that psychological stuff to YouTube, to this channel. So do subscribe and click on the bell icon, because there's going to be a lot of good stuff coming your way that's going to really give you the keys to become really good. Anyway, so back to what I was saying. So many people, like I keep talking about, are staring. They get in this narrow focus. It's like, is this the correct note? Is this correct? Is this correct? Is this correct? And with this level of intense, over-efforting narrow focus, there's pretty much almost zero awareness of how the body is feeling in any given moment. So I keep talking about this word interoception in all my other videos and on my podcast. So interoception, this means the felt sense of what is going on inside the body. And as I keep describing, it's not thinking about the body, it's directly feeling the raw physical sensations before they turn into thoughts, before we categorize them and go, oh, this sensation is this sensation is that. Before we think about it and categorize it, it's just this nebulous sort of raw physical sensation. And this activates a part of the brain called the insular cortex. And you can see that when there is a conscious awareness of how something feels, then that part of the brain lights up. And if we're completely oblivious about it, it doesn't mean we're not feeling it in some form or another. But when we feel things subconsciously without being aware of it, that part of the brain doesn't really light up. So when we're playing and we have zero interoception, because like a torch, and like, if we think of our attention as like a torch, and you can make the beam super narrow or super wide. Now, when we're in that narrow beam, there's no leftover attention for the body, and there's a part of the brain called the insular cortex, and this lights up when we are consciously aware of physical sensations. You can see this in brain scans, and so, you know, even if there are subconscious sort of feelings and stuff going on in the body, if we're not actually aware in any given moment what those sensations are, that part of the brain, the insular cortex, tends not to light up. It only lights up when we are consciously aware of it. And we can develop this almost like a muscle, because most people, when they are playing the piano and they're staring, and there's no leftover awareness of the body that is going to help them with rhythm. And I've spoken about this in other videos as well in this series, that it can also result, if we're not feeling our fingers and our hands, our technique is going to be awful, because technique depends on feeling into what's going on in the hand. But anyway, I'm going off on a tangent there. So yeah, basically being aware of rhythm in the body. So if I'm playing, even if I'm not moving, but I'm going to become aware of how my body feels as I play the same Mozart easy sonata piece. And I can't help it. I just can't help it. There's a little bit of me that's twitching, a little bit left, a little bit right. Now, if I exaggerate that, if I really sort of make those bigger, now they're not necessarily 1, 2, 3, 4. But, you know, also maybe if I'm sort of thinking about the beat and I'm going 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, my toe is ever so slightly sort of wiggling in my foot. My neck is ever so slightly. But if I do the opposite and I make my body rigid, and this is what I see a lot of my students do, the body is just stiff and rigid and tense. And that tension is there to basically hold the body and hold it from moving. And if I do this, well, now it's in time, but I've got no sense of the feeling of that rhythm. I don't think, could I do it? Could I just tense my body up and have a nice sense of rhythm? No, I can't. All the musicality, if I'm going, it's too much. But I literally cannot make the rhythm expressive if my body is tense and not moving. Even if my body doesn't move in time with the rhythm, I've got to be relaxed enough that my mind can imagine what it would feel like if I was moving. If I'm stiff and rigid and literally can't move, it's impossible to be musical. It's just completely impossible. And so this is where I see a lot of my students and a lot of people go wrong. It's this intense narrow focus and not being interoceptive, not being in the body. So, I don't have this in my notes for this particular video, but one thing that we can do all kinds of things like meditation and mindfulness, which are basically things to pull us into our body. I'm going to try not to go down this rabbit hole, but a lot of people completely misunderstand what mindfulness is, including people who write entire books about mindfulness and the piano. And you probably know who you are if you're watching this. Mindfulness is not just paying attention. That is not just what mindfulness is. Mindfulness is also being aware of what our bodies are feeling. This is a crucial part of mindfulness through the lens of Buddhism. But I'm going to talk about that in a whole different video. So another problem that I see a lot of students having, they might be aware that they need to fix these problems with rhythm. They might know that they've got some problems to do with rhythm, but they don't practice them. They don't practice how to deal with them. People sort of, either they're really bad at practicing, in which case they might just play and just go from the beginning to the end, over and over and over. I'm sure a lot of you do this. I'm sure you know that feeling, that impulse that we want to do that, rather than just stopping and breaking down sort of one small bit. How many of you do you take just that first part, even if you think you can play it? How often do you just basically really focus on that and really just spend time with it and develop it and make it better? Or more to the point, not the first bar in the whole piece, but maybe you look at the entire piece and you go, what's the most difficult bar? What's the thing that I'm struggling with the most? And you go straight there. And, I'm not going to go too much into this now because this video is already really ambitious, how much stuff I need to cover. But practice in general, how to practice just the piano, this needs an encyclopedia of books. It needs hours and hours and hours and possibly endless, the infinite amount of videos to address how do we practice. But I will be coming to some of those videos in the future. And if you click on the bell icon and the subscribe, I'm actually going to be looking at some of the academic research to see the actually what is it that is proven, that there's objective proof or evidence, I should say. What does the evidence show of what works when we practice and what doesn't work when we practice? But anyhow, back to what we're doing. Now, in this video, I'm going to be saying a lot of things that are going to be quite controversial. A lot of the things that I talk about are things that other teachers absolutely do not agree with. Like, I absolutely do not agree 99% of the time that metronomes are a good thing. And I'm going to come to this. I'm going to come to this later. But I also have quite a lot of my own methods for teaching how to have really musical rhythm that I've never seen other musicians talk about. Now, one of these, I have a theory. I have a theory that really good musical rhythm comes from the neck. It comes from how we use our neck. And to me, since I've noticed this is such an obvious thing, and I'm amazed that no one talks about this. Now, particularly if you watch people who play non-classical, who play jazz, rock, pop, all this kind of stuff, it's really easy to see this in that, but I would say that this still applies to classical music. When you watch, especially drummers, but also guitarists, but all musicians who are playing any music with a strong beat, even classical music with a strong beat, I want you to imagine something. I want you to imagine, I use the car a lot. Because when I think about when I'm really grooving and enjoying a piece of music and my body is just like feeling that pleasurable moving to the music and I'm really enjoying it, for some reason, the most vivid thing that comes to my mind of where I am when I do that seems to be the car. I don't know why the car. Maybe because sometimes I just pump the music out in the car. I tend not to pump music out so loud when I'm at home. Maybe that's what it is. But I guess there's also something about being in your own space in the car. But anyway, wherever this is, for some reason, I tend not to do this on a sofa. If I'm on my sofa listening to really sort of grooving music, I tend not to do this too much. Maybe I'm too comfortable. Maybe I'm too lazy. Maybe there's something about the hardness of the chair, of the seat in the car. Whatever it is, imagine that you've got your favorite music that has a really, really strong beat. It probably has got drums on it. For me, when I was younger, this really was Ray Charles. I used to work in London, hated living and working in London, and I basically commuted on the tube, on the underground, like the subway. And every time I listened to Ray Charles, I was just like, this is it. This is just such great music. And I'd be like grooving away and just enjoying everything, despite how much I hated commuting in London. So I think there's something about that as well, that when we're commuting, when we're traveling, that's the time when we most want to be uplifted. But anyhow, whatever that is for you, imagine it. And then what you want to kind of do, this is tricky, and this is again where some meditation can come in useful. We want to notice and maybe even play the music, if that helps. Play the music so that you can really groove to it. Remember, this is pleasurably moving to the music. You're feeling pleasure. You're not just doing it because I'm telling you. You're feeling deep, deep pleasure. Your body is enjoying it. Now, if you can notice the sensations in your neck and how your neck is moving without changing how it's moving and feeling, and that might take you a while. It might take you quite a few minutes. It might take you hours. It might take you months of sort of really trying to pay attention to it in a way that doesn't disturb how it naturally wants to move, because we all know how to do this. Unless we have brain damage of some kind, we all know how to groove and enjoy and feel music with our necks. So what it looks like to me, it's like I'm imagining And if we analyze it, without changing what we're doing, what tends to happen is that the neck goes forwards quite fast on the beat. Here's the beat, here's the beat, here's the beat. And then it comes up slowly. So it's like beat, beat, beat. And if I slow that down, really slow it down, it's like beat, beat, beat. And if we analyze it so that we can start to do this when we're not listening to our favorite music and we want to try and recreate this as we're working with rhythms, then we can notice that it's almost as if the chin is the thing that keeps the beat. Chin marks the beat and bounces straight back up. But I've got to emphasize that even when I become aware of how everything feels, I don't feel like the chin is leading everything. But if I kind of stop and think about which part of my entire head most marks, like if I was watching someone, where is it most obvious watching someone else where the beat is? I would say it's where the chin kind of bounces back up again, even though I'm not sort of mostly aware of that as I'm doing it. So we bounce like this, and then it's not like the beat is there, we stick there, and then come back up. No, we come down fast, and then it's a very smooth motion up. Fast, smooth motion up. Fast, smooth motion up. And it's not like we just go like this. This is not what it looks like. There's like, it's so hard to put into words. I almost don't want to put it into words. This kind of pigeon-like, if you think about like a pigeon walking along, it's not just forwards and backwards. It's not like walk like an Egyptian, but you have to, I can't tell you exactly what it is. You have to listen to your favorite music and you've got to feel what this feels like. And over time, you kind of internalize, what did this feel like? And then what I've got here, I've basically got a list of rhythms from simple all the way through to super complicated that I give to my students. And basically this is just for my students. I don't give this out to other people, but I will basically use some examples from here. So we start with 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit later about the importance of being able to count beats out loud. I will talk about that later, but let's say for the moment we're counting the beats out loud and we're clapping. So it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, what I like to do very gradually, right from the beginning, teaching someone from a beginner, but even people who come to me who are really advanced need to come right back to basics with a lot of this kind of stuff. Even diploma level students cannot do what I'm describing with my neck a lot of the time, which is why their rhythm just often doesn't sound good, because they're not feeling the rhythm in their body, because they're so hyper-fixated on trying to be good, trying to be competent, rather than sort of feeling it in a genuine way. So what we can do is 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And as you can see with my head, I've got that. I'm not just counting as an exercise. It's almost like there is music. I don't know what the music is, but I feel a pleasurable groove. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's very different to 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. Now, I know that sounds the same here, but once you start making music, you will hear the difference in the music that you're making. So already, you'll be amazed because you'll watch me do that and you go, yeah, that looks pretty simple. But what happens with a lot of people, they immediately go into like this left-brained, narrow focus, I have to be good at this. And the moment that we are thinking, the moment we think, how do I move my neck forwards? How do I move my neck back? How do I move all of this? You won't be able to do it. It's too complicated to do by thinking analytically about how everything moves. But it's a thing we're all born with. We're all born, well, I mean, okay, maybe not babies straight away, but within months, we know how to do this. We can absolutely do this. It's part of being human to go 1, 2, 3, 4 with that pleasurable feeling in the neck. So then what we can do, if we go on to example 2, and this is just basically splitting the crotchets or the quarter notes into quavers or eighth notes. And this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And this is where so many people have a problem. So many. Because what happens, and this is one of, again, within this thing of the most common problem being the problem of rhythm, one of the most common problems within rhythm that I see that pianists have is that every time a finger plays something, or every time we do something, every time a note happens, every time like we're clapping or we play something, if we haven't become used to this, there is a tendency that the neck wants to try and move to every single thing that we do with our hands and our body. So for example, if we go again back to this example number 2, and I show you what it ideally wants to be. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. You'll notice that my head goes down fast. So if I really slow this down, it goes 1, 2, 3, 4. And you notice that as my head comes up is when the and happens, like the in-between, the syncopated bits. So my head is coming up, I clap, and my neck is in no way affected by that. Now, I'll bet that 99% of you watching this cannot do that. It's amazing just how difficult this is for most people. What most people will do is they'll either be pulled into going 1, 2, and just find it impossible to get pulled out of 1, 2, or they'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, or maybe as they start to get better, they'll start to do something like this. 1, 2, but you'll see that the neck is marking that one as it comes up. We really want to get out of this. It's so vital that we can just go 1, 2. Now, yeah, I'm kind of getting a bit ahead of myself here, but one culprit for this is that a lot of teachers teach, understandably, that in the beginning, for very beginners, we can go 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and that's a really good way of understanding how we can play these quavers or eighth notes. But especially if I go forward to example 3, and this might be something quite difficult for a beginner. So we might want to go 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and then it's a simple way of being able to internalize that stuff. But the problem with that is you get real massive problems if you get too attached and too used to doing that, which is why I call using 1 and 2 and 3 and, or 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a, or 1E and a 2E and a 3 and a. To me, I call those with my students, they are training wheels, because like riding a bicycle, yeah, maybe They might help you on that bicycle. Maybe you're not going to be able to ride it unless you use those training wheels in the beginning. But the goal is you want to ditch them as long as possible. Imagine that you learn to ride a bike and you never take the training wheels off. That's going to be ridiculous for so many reasons. Like, number one, you're just not going to be able to ride the bike as well. And number two, you just look ridiculous. So, these training wheels, you want to think that you drop them as quickly as you can. And actually, when I learned to ride a bike, I never had training wheels. So, you can learn these rhythms without the training wheels. But I do use them with my students, but I do say to them, they are training wheels. Don't get attached to them. Now, as one example of what can go wrong when we use training wheels, and I hope my student doesn't mind me doing this. In fact, I will ask him before I post this. But I've got a new student who came to me a few weeks ago, and he's been working on this Clementi sonatina. So anyway, we've been working on this. And as with all my students who I've taken on very recently, rhythm is everybody's weakest thing. Now, this particular student who's been learning this Clementi sonatina has been absolutely practicing it, like 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2. And for this reason, it's like it's going to take a lot of undoing of these kinds of habits, because when we are just like 1 and 2 and 3 and his neck does this as well, so we've got 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and then here it just kind of falls apart. Now, if we try and sort of get it just to a feeling of just playing more musically, the left hand just sort of starts going in the wrong bits, like and then it just kind of falls apart a bit, because the only way that this particular student has been learning is 1 and 2 and 3, with the neck going on every single quaver, and then sort of struggling here where the neck can't do that on every single one. What we want ideally is, well, I'm nodding my head. Personally, I like this in 2/2. So for me, it's like. So I need to practice that little. But anyway, you get the idea. If I if I slowed it down a little bit and did it in 4, it would be like. Now let me make that a little bit more musical. So you can see that there's a feeling in my neck that I have with this. But if I'm going. I will never, no matter how well I try and play it, if my neck is feeling all those subdivisions of the quavers or eighth notes, I will never get that sounding musical, because there is, to me, a very, very magical telepathy that how we feel when we play music is how our audience is going to feel. And this is something for a whole different podcast, because there's actually a lot of evidence to support that this is exactly the case. That when people listen to us, they actually but what music does is it's a way of encoding physical sensations and movements into ways that other people can feel themselves. This is a massive topic. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. But if I'm feeling in my neck, that's how people are going to feel listening to it. And it's never, ever going to sound musical. And that's a problem that can happen, that when we don't learn to be like 1, 2, 3, 4, in this way that our head does that without going 1, or 1, 2, and 3, and 4. And this is such a massive, massive problem. So hopefully I have persuaded most of you to some degree that this neck thing is something that's really powerful. And if you think about, watching a really good drummer and they're playing, the drummer, their neck movements, they are experts at, well, not experts, because it's just something that comes naturally. They don't work on how they move their neck. Their neck just is. Imagine a drummer who plays without moving their neck. And imagine a drummer who does this. Now imagine a pianist who's kind of not keeping time strictly like a drummer, but imagine a pianist who moves around Like, I'm almost becoming like Ray Charles there. But think about Ray Charles then, for that matter. His neck is very, very expressive. But you don't have to move like Ray Charles. There just has to be some kind of... But the neck is where we feel emotion and subtlety and nuance, and it's where we enjoy rhythm. Yeah, we enjoy rhythm to some degree in our whole bodies, but the neck is really like... That's the juice of rhythm to me, and to me, this is a thing that the more I meditate, the more I sort of become mindful, for want of a better word, and I think about how I feel when I'm enjoying music. So much is going on in the neck, and I think that people don't really talk about this or notice it. Now, I think that it's incredibly useful to be able to count the beats out loud as we play, because I do not believe in metronomes, as I mentioned earlier. For most music, metronomes are great if you're going to play with a drummer. Metronomes are great if you're going to play with a click track. Otherwise, why would you use a metronome? So there's kind of two reasons to use a metronome. The main one, which is why most teachers use a metronome, is when a student is playing and they're clearly not in time. They're clearly not aware of where the beats are, the pulses are, their rhythm's just all over the place. So a student who plays like I played at the beginning, of like... A lot of teachers will just be like, right, get the metronome, because this is just like the most obvious way of fixing it. You can immediately see that it's wrong. Now... But before I get to that, the second reason, and this is a good reason to use the metronome, when a composer who was alive when metronomes existed, so not Bach, not sort of early Beethoven, not early classical, but when a composer actually owned a working metronome and put on their music a suggested metronome marking, maybe we want to quickly put that metronome, make that metronome tick, and go, what was the speed they had in mind? But even then, I don't like to get too attached to that. It all depends. What are the characteristics of the particular piano that you're playing on? What are the acoustics like? What do you want to, what are you feeling from that piece of music? Maybe you are feeling slightly different things in the music from what the composer intended, which a lot of the time is absolutely fine. We don't all hear the same piece of music in exactly the same way. It depends on so many things. So it's just as a rough guide. Now, in that case, metronome, fine, but then turn it off. So if we count out loud, if a student is going 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, it should be obvious to them that that's not keeping a regular time. And when I recommend counting out loud, most of the time we're counting to 4 tops. Like sometimes it's 2, sometimes it's 3. It's very unlikely we're counting to 5. Okay, a lot of teachers might argue that we count to 6, count to 9, count to 12 in compound time. This is a bit too much for this particular episode, but my way of counting compound times, to say you're counting 9/8 or 12/8, to me they are in 3 and they are in 4, but I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. If you want me to talk more about that, I'll do that in a different video. So let's say we're doing this, we're counting to 4, we're counting to 4 tops. Now, a mistake that I see a lot of my students do, they count as if counting to 4 was the most difficult thing in the world. And I don't want anybody to feel attacked. Everyone does this. Everyone does this. They're like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, as if counting to 4 is the most difficult thing. Yeah, I'm sure you know what I mean. And you know, I'm not being mean. This is just normal. This is normal. This is what everyone does. Now, what we did, and it comes about as a result of this narrow, tight focus. And actually, if you think about it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Try it. Say 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 so many times for like 2 minutes. You can stop the video if you want. Say it over and over and over again for 2 minutes until it just stops meaning anything. It's like your brain, it just becomes just sound. It doesn't even mean anything. That's almost how we want it to feel when we're counting. When we're going 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. For me, I'm trying to get as close as I can that it is a muscle memory. It's a muscle memory of my tongue, my lips, my mouth, my vocal cords, my lungs, and this 1, 2, 3, like 1, 2, 3, 4. It occupies almost zero space in my brain because it's just the saying 1, 2, 3, 4. We don't even need to think about it. It's so automatic, right? And if we can become a little bit interoceptively aware of what it feels like in our mouth as we say it, 1, 2, 3, 4, that can start to sort of get a groove of its own. So if I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, I can feel that there's a disruption in that natural groove. If I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. It's almost like my heart skips a beat. It's like the heart. It's like the heart is just going and then just suddenly stops. You go, oh, what happened? So when we're counting out loud, this is a really powerful way to be our own metronome. And I would argue that most professional musicians, so every single professional musician, I would argue, somewhere in their minds, the part of the brain that controls the way that the tongue and the lips and the vocal cords, even if they're not counting out loud, somewhere is a 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3 as they're playing. Somewhere it is a thing that gets internalized. And what I see as one of the most common problems that everyone has who's not a professional is they haven't internalized that inner counting. So I guarantee you, any professional pianist who goes is counting 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, 1, 2, imagining very, very subtly in the back of their minds sort of that feeling of counting, because that's kind of what keeps in time. It's not just the neck and it's not just the body, but there's also like this 1, 2, or this 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. And let me sort of whisper it. Let me try and be really quiet and get really far away from the microphone. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. I mean, even quieter than that, but if you imagine that that's always there in your mind, that's incredibly powerful. We all need this. And so this is where a lot of people go wrong who are not professional musicians. So what I recommend to all of my students is at least once be able to play your piece of music counting the beats out loud. Because once you can do that, once you've done that, somewhere in the back of your mind, hopefully, you will still have internalized that it's still counting somewhere. So if I've just gone like with this Clementi sonatino, you know, and I can't play it exactly like a student would play it with some of the wrong counts, but, you know, you could tell that there were some beats missing there. A lot of students would never even notice that. They wouldn't even notice because they're not counting in their head. But if we can just at least once go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. Now, for most people, that's almost impossible because let's say, like, it's already difficult. A lot of people want to go 1, 2, 3. That's why there's this 1 and 2, and people use the training wheels because the mouth wants to do something at the same time that the fingers do something. But that's why it's so important from the beginning to uncouple this and be able to go 1, 2, 3, 4, and especially like in the second bar, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. And my mouth is uncoupled from having to do something every single time my fingers do something. Now, this might seem simple, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, but oh my God, it's actually unbelievably difficult for most people because the tongue keeps wanting to do something. But you can imagine to a professional, of course, is 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. I mean, it's just kind of obvious. I hope that's just kind of obvious that, of course, someone who's musical can do that. So if you want to become more musical, you need to take the painful, and it is painful, you need to take the painful steps to get closer to being able to do that. So one of the ways that's going to be able to help you with this is I've developed a strategy because, you know, I used to play viola semi-professionally, and I'm afraid, sorry, viola players, I'm guilty, completely guilty. This is why everyone makes jokes about viola players. For pretty much all of my life, I never practiced the viola, never touched it, never picked it up unless I was actually rehearsing or performing. So every time that I was in an orchestra or in a chamber group or, string quartet, whatever I was doing, on my lessons, sorry, viola teachers, that was the only time that I was then practicing. So if you imagine you're playing in a big orchestra, you're sight reading, you've done no practice, and the whole orchestra's playing, and if you get a rhythm wrong and you play in the wrong place, the floor will drop out from under you. And so I got really good that I didn't do that, because I got really good at sight reading rhythms and sight reading in general. Now, what I think that every single good person does who's a professional or who's good at sight reading, what they do is the moment they look at any piece of sheet music, instantly, the brain needs to see where the beats are, or where the pulses are. So any piece of music, like if I look at this sonatina and I look at the first line, I can't look at the first line without immediately seeing what I would describe as an augmented reality grid of vertical lines where all the beats are. Now, sometimes it's not, if it's quite an easy piece of music, those lines might be really, really faint, because I don't need them to be really strong. But the more difficult the piece of music becomes rhythmically, the more clearly I see these vertical lines. So, for example, bar 2, I probably would kind of start seeing more of those vertical lines. So like there's a line. So I'm going to go from bar 2, 1, line here, 2, line here, line here, line here. And I absolutely see these lines, because if I don't see those lines, and like if my students don't see those lines and they're just counting 1, well, that's why they need to go 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, because otherwise it's like, oh, well, where's beat 2? And if we're not automatically looking for those beats and automatically grouping everything, you just have to go, well, here's the 1, here's the and of 1, here's the 2, here's the and of 2. Did I say that right? I don't know, but it's difficult that way. But if I look at that first bar and just instantly see 1, 2, 3, 4, then I don't even need to think about it. I just follow along with those lines as I play, and it's just 1, 2, 3, 4, because I literally just think the number as I get to that line. It's that simple. So this to me is such a strong habit. And I coach my students in this, and I coach students who have been finding rhythm unbelievably difficult. And when I coach them into visualizing these lines, instantly they can play it, they can count out loud, they can do all of these things. But it's a thing that the brain has resistance to doing, because it's a little bit of extra work, and the brain is like, so the brain thinks, surely I don't need to do that. But you have to take my word for it that the reason why this habit exists in my mind, and I believe exists for all good musicians, this is actually there to make the counting easier. So if I get to bar 2 and it's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, well, all I do is I just count when I get to those lines. So it takes a little bit of extra effort. That's the moment I look at that bar, and there's like a feeling of tension in my brain, because it has to go, where's the beats? And like with this, it's just super easy. But the more complicated the rhythms get, the brain just has to know where does it go? Where are those lines? And I can't rest until I know where those vertical lines are, and then see them. And then once they're there, it's so easy. It's a piece of cake. So, I'll probably talk about this more in another video if people would like me to, but this is an absolute game changer. But I describe this to my students. They're not sure about it at first, but then they're like, oh my God, this really works. This absolutely works. And in the lesson, it's like, wow, this is powerful stuff. Then they go away. Then they come back, they can't do it. And I'm like, did you practice visualizing the grid lines? No. And it's one of those things that almost none of my students actually go away and practice this. But I've got a couple of students at the moment who have been practicing this. And it's funny, because within 1 week or 2 weeks, I'm like, oh my God, what's happened to your rhythm? That's incredible. And they're like, yeah, I practiced what you told me. And, the difference is day and night with my students who practice this versus with my students who don't. So, I so recommend this. And this transforms being able to count out loud. This is one of the reasons why so many people just find it hard to count the beats out loud, because they are not they don't have a broader view of where these beats are as they get to that bar. If we're sort of in bar 2 and we go 1, 2, 3, it's impossible if we're not already ahead of time, ahead of like the second I look at that bar. If we're not immediately seeing those vertical lines, of course it's difficult to count the beats out loud, but those vertical lines, it makes it so easy. That's just where you say the beats. It's so easy. Another thing that I try and get my students to do, because I was talking before about students playing and they're very, very stiff, that they don't want to move. They're just, or maybe more like this. This is going to be more accurate. I'm going to be hunched forwards, staring, trying really hard, using every ounce of my willpower and striving. But I'm still too much aware of my body. It's so hard for me to force myself to have that super narrow, like effortful, trying so hard to the point where I don't even realize I have a body. Everything's so tense. So basically, a technique that I found really useful. My students do not like this. There's so much resistance to this, but it works because, again, you know, rhythm, good groove, the pleasurable feeling of music, of wanting to move to music. Step 1 is, if we can't move at all because our entire body is rigid and we can't move, step 1 is we have to free it up and start moving. So when I teach this, yes, it's contrived. It's a bit contrived in the beginning and it feels completely unnatural and people don't like it. But what this is, it's just a nudge. It's a push. It's a push to persuade the body to stop being so rigid and tense and start getting used to moving. So what I do is I try and persuade people to move left and right, not forwards and backwards, because to me, forwards is like an increase of tension, of musical tension, and backwards is a release of musical tension. We don't really want to be going... That's just wrong, because it's like, this is what we do when we get tension. But I'll talk about that in another video. But this... what I'm doing is I'm going left and right. I actually think that this is too much to talk about in this particular video. There's a lot of nuances to this, but this is another way that I just try and get people to start moving. And a lot of people then sort of misunderstand it. I explain it over and over and over again, but I think people, that they're locked in such a, I must figure out how to play correctly. And again, that's something else I'm going to talk about in another video, the dangers of just being locked into, there must be a correct way to do this. But anyhow, I'm going to try not to go down that rabbit hole. So to start with, left, right, left, right, left, right. And then a lot of people go, okay, is this correct now? It's like, no. It's not, you should be moving left and right and left and right. This is just the first step towards freeing you up until you find your own way of... And the way I was moving there, it wasn't actually bang in time. It wasn't like correct here, that. But I'm just moving naturally, or as naturally as I can, in a way that I'm making myself move on the spur of the moment. You know, it's not completely natural. Completely natural is I'm not thinking about it. But you know, it's relatively natural. But step 1 is, well, how do we get from completely rigid and tense to moving in a natural way? And I hope that people can see that it's logical, that the first way is to kind of set up some kind of movement that isn't sort of too bad. And this left and right is quite a nice way of keeping time. But I'm going to have to talk about that in a completely separate video because it's going to take me ages to actually describe some of the finer points of that. So another thing that people can do who are finding rhythm tricky, especially classical students, because I think almost every single classical student, rhythm is always going to be their weakest point. And I love using things like Rockschool. So Rockschool is an examination board like ABRSM, like Trinity, and they focus on rock music. They do have a classical syllabus, but anyway. So they do rock, pop, jazz, and most of their pieces, almost all of the pieces, have a backing track. And so you take the exams by playing along to a backing track, which are really beautifully produced, you know, really enjoyable to play along to. And so, you know, you have a guide that counts in. There's like 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you start playing with the backing track. Well, yeah, that's going to instantly force so many people who don't really have great rhythm, because you have to play good rhythm to match with what the backing track is doing. You can't just play at your own speed and speed up and slow down. No, you've got to match what the backing track is doing. And so there, by the way, that is a good example of where you would use a metronome, because you have to keep absolutely bang in time with a very set rhythm. Or just play with other musicians. So, if you're playing, and pianists tend not to play with a lot of other musicians. When I was at school and I was younger, I was lucky enough to go to a great school with so many amazing musicians. And I was always, as a pianist, I was always accompanying people. I always had friends that I played piano duets with. But I also sort of played in orchestras. But also I was a viola player. And as a viola player, I was just always playing with other people. And I play electric guitar, and I love playing electric guitar in bands. The pianists have such bad rhythm because they don't play with other people that often. And so when you play with other people, you can't have bad rhythm. You can't, because otherwise you're just not in time with them. So, maybe as a pianist as well, you can experiment with playing with backing tracks, maybe find other people to play duets with and accompany, because this will force you to fix all these kinds of problems. So, anyway, let me now give you a recap of everything that we've spoken about. So we started with the fact that rhythm is felt by the body, and the importance of interoception, which is the inner, direct felt experience of the physical sensations of the body, not thinking about the body, but the direct sensations. I spoke about the concept of groove as defined by a music psychologist, of the pleasurable state of wanting to move the body in time with music. The key point being here, pleasurable, because I think that when we're practicing and when we're trying to improve our rhythm, we're missing the point a lot of the time, non-professionals, that it's got to feel pleasurable. If it doesn't feel pleasurable, it's not going to be quite right. I spoke about some research findings, very common, very solid research findings, that when we move our bodies in synchrony and at the same time as other people, we feel a much closer connection with those people, closer bonds, closer trust. And so it's the same with music. When we feel that our bodies move with the music, we're going to feel much more empathy. We're going to feel much more connected with the music. There's a lot more subtlety and nuance to that, but maybe I'll leave that for a different video. So why do non-professionals struggle so much with rhythm? Well, so much of it, and I talk about this in most of my recent videos and in my podcast. My podcast, Art of the Piano, is mostly about the psychology, and it's basically when non-professionals, for the most part, are practicing, learning, performing, there's this very, very narrow focus. There's this sort of narrow, one thing at a time, this note, everything must be correct. There's this feeling of striving. The shoulders are forwards, the neck is forwards. There's like fight or flight. And it's just intense, working really hard in this narrow focus, counterproductive way. I'll talk more about this in a video that's going to come out shortly. So again, press the subscribe and the bell, because there are some really good videos coming up on this. But this is basically one of the biggest things that causes the most problems. So it's basically way too narrow a focus, that also then means that not only can we not hear the rhythm, not only are we not aware of rhythm, but we're cut off from all the sensations in our body. And I think there's also like a lack of awareness in most people who are not professionals, just how important the rhythm is. That if the rhythm is wrong, that's much worse than playing the wrong notes. So the sort of, it doesn't matter. A lot of people think it doesn't matter if I don't know where all the beats are, as long as it just kind of feels right. No, we really need to know where the beats are. So I came up with my pet theory that the way that we move our necks is like really the most crucial thing in, do we have a pleasurable sensation to music? It's too much to explain about here in these bullet points, so go back to the bit, and basically in the description below I will have broken everything down with all the timestamps. So if you're interested in how the neck movements contribute to a really good sense of rhythm, go back and listen to that. But just very quickly, one thing we can do is that when we're really enjoying a piece of music with loads of energy, that's got a really strong beat, maybe with drums, and we sort of notice, how do we feel when we're grooving and moving to it? Just notice what your neck feels like as you do that. So then I also came up with one of my strategies, which is like an augmented reality grid for visualizing beats. And again, that's a lot to go into. You'll have to sort of go and watch that. But basically, anytime I look at any piece of music, my mind instantly wants to visualize a grid to see where the beats are in that. And it makes everything so much easier. So I also spoke about the importance of being able to count out loud, and how for me, personally, it's just, for me personally, very obvious that being able to count out loud is way better than practicing with a metronome. Metronomes are fine. Metronomes are useful if you're practicing with a drummer or with a click track, but otherwise a metronome will interfere with the feelings of tension and release that means that you want to speed up and slow down a little bit. You can watch one of my earlier videos in this series, Most Common Mistakes, to see more about tension and release. You can see that there. But if we're counting out loud, we will feel whether or not we're in time, and we can allow the pulse to breathe, to speed up and slow down with tension and release. So controversial, but watch that bit in my video if you want to know more. I never spoke about how to actually practice and how to break this down. I'm going to have to leave this for another video, but I will also in a future video show you exactly how to break stuff down so that you can learn how to count out loud with stuff that's really difficult, because, oh my God, everyone finds that really, really hard. I also spoke about how I encourage my students to start moving left and right in a little bit of a contrived way, because music is in the body. If we're rigid and completely unmoving, we're never going to be able to have music that sounds musical. So as a first step, I kind of guide my students into moving left and right inside with the music. It's only the first step, just to kind of nudge people in the right direction. That's something I'm probably going to have to talk about more in a future video. And then I also spoke about the importance of playing with other people to develop rhythm. And for pianists, I really recommend the Rockschool syllabus, which they do really great backing tracks. And even for classical students, even for my classical students, a lot of the time I do recommend these Rockschool exams, which is like rock, jazz, pop, because it forces people to fix their rhythm. So I hope that was useful, and if that was useful for you, do all the usual blah 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 stuff. Like, subscribe, click the bell icon, support the channel. It really does help. I've been unbelievably ambitious there and trying to squeeze in so many things. So I hope you enjoyed it. Go away and do some practice or watch more of my videos, and enjoy yourselves, and see you for the next video. Take care. Goodbye.